Based on scientific data, some frankly were not. The burdensome 6-foot social distancing rule did not have sufficient scientific report. In your words, it just sort of appeared. Distancing made sense, but the 6 feet was arbitrary. Even Dr. Collins said he still hasn't seen any empirical evidence to support the 6-foot rule. A rule that shut down schools and businesses, a rule that will have negative ramifications for decades. As the pandemic wore on, more mandates also just sort of appeared, but the American public didn't get to see the scientific data to support these mandates. Americans were aggressively bullied, shamed, and silenced for merely questioning or debating issues such as social distancing, masks, vaccines, or the origins of COVID.
You know there ain't no forgetting.
Hi everyone, this is Lad Dilgard. Welcome to another episode of Stand and Speak. We're not forgetting, and the fact of the day today is that there was no quantitative scientific support for the 6 feet of social distancing rule. None. I challenged people online and in person many times to prove that there was 6 feet of social distancing, like that was scientifically proven to stop the spread of an airborne virus. People said, oh yeah, there's scientific evidence. Turns out there wasn't. So under testimony from Fauci, or with Fauci, with the newly released, as told in the newly released Senate or House Select Subcommittee report on the coronavirus pandemic that was chaired by Ohio Congressman Brad Wenstrup, Dr. Francis Collins of the NIH and Dr. Fauci said, the 6 feet rule just appeared out of nowhere. In fact, almost everything that bureaucrats did to us in the coronavirus pandemic just came out of nowhere. I'm calling this episode the final solution that the elites declared on their hated working class people and children who they think of dirty little creatures who take up all of the resources that they could otherwise have happily. So we're going to go into some findings from that House Select Subcommittee. We're going to talk about teachers' unions and Randy Weingarten, the AFT head, who advocated for school closures and then lied about it afterwards, and just talk about what a debacle this coronavirus was. This Select Subcommittee report was released this week, and there's a lot of cabinet hearings going on, or cabinet appointment discussions going on. There was an assassination of the United Healthcare CEO in New York. There's many things that are in the news, and this just got swept under the rug because the media and Democrats want us to forget what they did for those 2 years, but we're not forgetting.
You know there ain't no forgetting.
So first about this report, we would have never seen this had Republicans not taken control of the House during the last election cycle. And I've been doing a lot of reading and research, like a lot of people have, since the beginning of the pandemic back in 2020. And with all of the things I was learning, I was thinking, man, I'm going to write a book about this. There's so much. And then I found that there was already a much better book than I could ever write, written by Alex Berenson, called Pandemia. I'm not speaking on his behalf or anything. I just read it, and it's loaded with facts and data that, to my knowledge, his Substack information that he puts on Substack and his data analysis has never been refuted. They say, oh, he's biased, oh, he's crazy, oh, he's this. They haven't refuted any of the facts or data. And you can you can write in the comments section here on YouTube if I'm wrong about that. But it is loaded with references and data analysis The other good book, A Plague Upon Our House by Scott Atlas, who was brought in by the Trump administration way too late. Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx hated his guts. He was right about everything. The media maligned him. They said he was a kook, fringe doctor, a radiologist or something. But Scott Atlas was right. Scott Atlas was sober and reasonable and was just the level head on the Mike Pence-led coronavirus task force that before Atlas got involved was just a group of sheep following Dr. Birx around, Deborah Birx, who was wrong about everything and really annoyed the governors of the states by going around telling them the same things over and over again and not providing any data, not providing any scientific analysis. But this particular episode could go on for 10 hours, and I just wanted to succinctly talk about some things that were in the task force, the subcommittee's report on coronavirus. Now, I want to talk about first that 6 foot of social distancing rule and what this says about it. So the select subcommittee's report on page 198, section 4, the 6 foot social distancing requirement was not supported by science. On March 22nd, 2020, the CDC issued guidance specifically designating 6 feet or 2 arms lengths as the distance that would reduce the spread of coronavirus. Governments at every level and private entities implemented social distancing nationwide in a manner that adversely impacted nearly every person in the country. Small businesses limited the capacity of patrons allowed in the shop at one time. Grocery stores placed stickers on the floor alerting people where to stand. Schools struggled to reopen because the rule limited the number of desks that could be in the classroom at one time. What might not be readily apparent to everybody, maybe it is that everything that they made us do, all of the sheep herd garbage practically, was based on this 6 feet of social distancing rule. And I went digging back in 2020 for scientific proof or analysis on this 6 feet rule, and I couldn't find any. We went to Mexico on vacation at the end of 2020, and I noticed in the airport there was a social distancing guidance on the floor of 1.5 meters, roughly 5 feet. And I thought, so the virus behaves differently in Mexico than it does in the United States? Or did the Mexican scientists come up with something different? Obviously, I thought this is garbage. There is nothing to this. 6 feet of social distancing, the report goes on, was a phrase and rule known by every American during the pandemic. Amazingly, social distancing guidance was not revised until August 2022. Even though it was CDC guidance and not a mandate, it was forcefully implemented by state and local governments and caused lots of strife amongst Americans. Social distancing requirements were largely responsible for closing businesses, heightening a sense in loss of community, and were part of the reasoning schools could not reopen for so long. While 6 feet of social distancing was a cornerstone policy associated with COVID-19 pandemic, like many others that were implemented, public health leadership did not articulate or explain the science behind the decision because there was no science behind the decision. Dr. Fauci testified regarding what studies he and the CDC reviewed before imposing such a harsh policy on the American people for such a length of time. And he goes on, Fauci says that, I don't know, the 6 feet thing just appeared out of nowhere. So we're supposed to trust the science. We're supposed to trust the public health bureaucrats. We're supposed to trust the leaders. And they impose draconian, incredible rules that crushed businesses, crushed kids, crushed everybody with no scientific basis. You could also say that about masks. You can say that about vaccine mandates. And you could say that about 15 days to stop the spread, all kinds of things about COVID. And they just did it anyway. Here's some more from Dr. Wenstrup, who was lecturing Fauci on not being the science and just pounding him as much as he was able to do.
While policy decisions should have been based on scientific data, some frankly were not. The burdensome 6-foot social distancing rule did not have sufficient scientific report. In your words, it just sort of appeared. Distancing made sense, but the 6 feet was arbitrary. Even Dr. Collins said he still hasn't seen any empirical evidence to support the 6-foot rule. A rule that shut down schools and businesses, a rule that will have negative ramifications for decades. As the pandemic wore on, more mandates also just sort of appeared, but the American public didn't get to see the scientific data to support these mandates. Americans were aggressively bullied, shamed, and silenced for merely questioning or debating issues such as social distancing, masks, vaccines, or the origins of COVID. Many Americans were willing to comply with the 15 days to slow the spread and understood the necessity of banning travel from certain countries in an attempt to slow down the virus.
So one thing that Fauci and others and big tech and the media did during COVID, as we all know, is they censored dissenting opinions. Alex Berenson got thrown off of Twitter. I got suspended from Facebook and then left Facebook because I shared an article from the Wall Street Journal from a New York psychiatrist that said people who want to continue lockdowns, they want to stay in their home, are people with a mental health issue that makes them want to stay home and be shuttered in. And they advocate for continued lockdowns because it makes them feel better because everybody else is locked in. Well, the Facebook suspended my account, and I didn't have a lot of followers at the time or anything, but they throttled and censored Scott Atlas and so many people. And you know what? I was right about that. And now people are realizing that they were wrong about what they did, but they want to cover that up. So the censoring was something that was unconstitutional, but I wanted to get back to we're not forgetting. Jay Bhattacharya, who authored the Great Barrington Declaration, which was a statement saying that there are balanced approaches to this pandemic, that herd immunity is a real thing, and that lockdowns are a bad thing. And he had hundreds of thousands of medical experts and scientists sign on to this. I asked people who weren't really involved in politics at the time, have you heard of the Great Barrington Declaration? And they're like, no, I don't know what that is. And I said, exactly, because big tech and media buried it. And Francis Collins, the head of the NIH at the time, said, we're going to take down, like take them down, all these fringe people who are questioning our scientific authority. Now, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who's been sober and accurate and realistic about the COVID pandemic from the beginning, along with a handful of other very well-known doctors and scientists, he's appointed as the head of the NIH in the new Trump administration. So not only is the sheriff in Tampa had to leave, but the new sheriff, there's going to be a new sheriff in town with the NIH, and then to really rub it in, RFK Jr. was nominated to head the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, he's the guy who authored the book and the movie, The Real Anthony Fauci. And now we're going to get to the bottom of this, and hopefully systems and processes and legal action will take place where this kind of thing could never happen again. But Biden is already talking about, some of the Biden people are talking about a pardon, a preemptive pardon, which may be unconstitutional, I don't know, for Fauci, for crimes, including lying to Congress multiple times and funding the Wuhan lab where the virus, it's all but certain the virus originated from the Wuhan coronavirus lab, which they lied about and tried to submerge those details for so long. I want to get to a few other things that are in the table of contents of the select subcommittee's report, and then talk about teachers' unions. So these are titles, and there's lots of information in this 557-page document, the House Select Subcommittee's report on coronavirus. The virus that causes COVID-19 likely emerged because of a laboratory or research-related accident. The proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2 was prompted by Dr. Fauci to disprove the lab leak theory. EcoHealth Alliance facilitated gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, something that Senator Rand Paul pounded on for years and tried to get answers to. The Paycheck Protection Program was rife with fraudulent claims resulting in at least $64 billion of taxpayers' dollars lost to fraudsters and criminals. Fraudulent unemployment insurance payments total more than $191 billion. $191 billion. Man, everybody was feeding from the trough. Lackluster oversight resulted in transnational criminal organizations stealing taxpayer money from pandemic relief funds. Domestic and international fraudsters stole from pandemic relief programs who were also connected to other crimes. The World Health Organization failed to uphold its mission and caved to Chinese Communist Party pressure. Public health officials flip-flopping on the efficacy and use of face masks without full scientific transparency caused mistrust in public health establishments. I personally witnessed the head of our county health department come to a school board meeting with the flimsiest and most worthless data points I have ever seen, advocating for full masking of the school population when we had a few dozen cases in our 4,200 student district. And she had these graphs look like they were drawn by a 7th grader and saying, oh, these are somebody's babies, and it was unbelievable. No consideration of the damage that was being done to kids that had to wear a mask all freaking day, which is not something that's supposed to be done to anybody. But they did it anyway. And then a lot of those school board members who voted for it lost their position, as they should have. The Biden administration exceeded its authority by mandating masks. Do you realize that if it was not for one federal judge in Florida, Biden's administration would still have us wearing masks on planes and trains and taxis? That was never rescinded. No one has ever came out, Fauci, Biden, anybody, and said, okay, let's stop with the masks. The other day I was in a big box retailer and I saw a little boy, maybe 8, 9, 10 years old, with a mask on, cloth mask. And he was there with his idiot grandfather or something who was wearing a mask also. And I'm just wondering what's going through their heads, or how sheep herd do they have to be for people to still be wearing a surgical mask inside of an airport or inside of a big box retailer. So the reason they are is because the bureaucrats have never came out and said, we lied to you, there's no evidence, like those masks, viruses go right through them, and if you wear them loosely, they go right through the sides. People are still wearing masks like sheep herds. And the law would still be enforcing it if not for one single federal judge in Florida. Here in Ohio, our governor, DeWine, who is supposed to be a Republican, he was as lockdown aggressive and mask aggressive as any Democrat governor. And he had to have his emergency authority ripped out of his tiny little hands by a supermajority of a Republican-dominated General Assembly, both House and Senate. And it was a very close election. All the Democrats wanted him to keep up his dictatorship emergency authority. They all voted for it against this removing this emergency authority. And I think pretty much all the Republicans voted for removing it. So I say often, I don't know when DeWine would have ever ended mask mandates or emergency authority or kept everybody in a panic. DeWine and the public health authority, through bad science and bad recommendations, kept everyone in a panic for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. And I think it would still be going today had it not been for people like Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Kulldorff, Scott Atlas, Alex Berenson, Ron DeSantis, who, the governor of Florida, he got out in front of a lot of the pandemic measures, and he was the first and most aggressive for saying this is BS. And he, with as much force as the governor's office has in Florida, which is not unlimited, he pushed back on the lockdowns and the mandates down there, even pushed some local districts to stop with the masking of all kids. So that's why I say don't forget about this, because this was a test of totalitarian authority. And the elites, people who work at home on a laptop and have high degrees and comfy jobs in the government, they didn't care. They didn't care about the gym that gets put out of business or the nail salon. They were at home, sipping lattes and watching DeWine on TV every day. And I say that this was the elite's final solution against the working class, because they disdain the working class. These people, they don't give a crap about people who are plumbers or carpenters or truck drivers or people that actually have to go out and work with their hands. They're like, I don't even know what those guys are doing for money. I don't care. Just have the government send them a check. They don't care about kids, obviously. I heard many times over the course of the years from teachers and other people of like, all these kids in the schools, they're all dirty little germ factories, little disgusting little maggot, kids and everything. I walked out of a church once where I was doing some volunteer work, and I saw a little kid, like 3 or 4 years old, wearing a mask all by himself, sitting on steps with a little lunchbox, just waiting for somebody to pick him up, And I'm like, what kind of a pathetic piece of crap makes this kid sit there or even wear a mask? This was a little kid, like pre-kindergarten. And I mean, the people went nuts, and they're still nuts. There's people, despite all of the scientific evidence being totally against everything that was done, there's people still wearing masks on planes. People putting masks on their little kids at a big box retailer. They just have not left the sheep herd because they have a mental illness, and they have an unfounded trust in the public health authorities who have been proven wrong but won't admit it. So just a few more things from the table of contents here. CDC relied on flawed studies. This is a finding from the House Select Subcommittee. The CDC and prevention relied on flawed studies to support the issuance of mask mandates. They didn't have, the decades before COVID, there was uncategorically proven studies and plenty of declarations that population masking does not work to stop the spread of a virus. That was the the scientific community's consensus. Until in mid or early in 2020, the media kept putting pressure on public health authorities. Like, do we need to wear masks? Are we going to wear masks? What about masks? Well, why aren't we wearing masks? Shouldn't you recommend masks? And Fauci and these other idiots flip-flopped. They went from Fauci's on tape of like, masks don't work, don't do masks, leave masks for the people who are in surgery and hospitals. Until the media pressured him and he flipped and said, oh yeah, masks work. You all gotta wear masks. And then he went all in on, not only do you need one mask, but you need 2 or 3 masks, maybe even 4. He was on video saying this stuff. And then those masks aren't good enough. Then we got to go to N95 masks, which are, if you read any manual on N95 masks, they're not supposed to be worn for extended lengths of time. People want to put N95 masks on little kids all day long, which will practically kill them if it's really done. The Chinese bolted people into their apartment buildings to keep them from spreading the virus. The Australians rounded up people on horses and drove them off of the streets and arrested people for violating COVID protocols. The governor of Minnesota and governor of Ohio, they set up tattletale hotlines to say if people were violating COVID protocols. Everybody turned into a tattletale. I saw people on Nextdoor complaining about a bunch of kids playing volleyball in a park, saying, "Oh, they're spreading the virus. They're killing people. Why are they doing this?" I heard this is Ohio State football country, and there's a show called Bucks Line on Thursday nights before Ohio State football games, and this one was going on in fall of 2020. And of course, we were still counting COVID cases there. Oh, you test positive, you test negative. Doesn't matter if they were sick, it's whether they tested positive or not. And there was a handful of Ohio State football players who tested positive for COVID. And I guess they got pulled out of the upcoming game or something. Jim Lachey, who's the color commentator on radio for Ohio State football, and a couple of other idiots on 610 WTVN, lambasted these kids as being selfish and self-centered, and why can't they stay at home and shelter, as if these kids could control the spread of a virus. You gotta be, I was listening to this, I was working, and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. You're pointing the finger at these college athletes because they caught a cold, as if they can control it. They went mad. People thought they could control the virus if they could just lock everybody in a building and lock everybody away from each other. It was just incredibly maddening. So unscientific, this is page 7 of the table of contents. Unscientific COVID-19 lockdowns caused more harm than good, unnecessarily harmed the U.S. economy, unnecessarily damaged Americans' mental health, and disrupted the development of American children and young adults, and had severe consequences for Americans' physical health. Those lockdowns did. So let's listen to Randy Weingarten telling everybody to lock down, or excuse me, all the schools for teachers to kids to stay home.
Schools safely. You got to delay school opening because if you don't have the mask, how are you going to be able to do this? There's a huge difference between working in Walmart and working in a school. Even a situation like Florida, where it was pretty clear that schools should not reopen, and where Miami schools did not reopen because you had people who were courageous and who were willing to defy DeSantis's denials.
And why are they closing now?
Martha, they're closing now because what the city said, and frankly, what lots of other places are also seeing, is a huge skyrocketing increase.
Now you're not listening to me. What they're telling us, though, is that the wisest scientific move is to have children in school.
Is that they're trying to figure out a regional a regional way of opening and closing like they did after
they
the
don't need to
Jewish
close.
holidays.
That's the point.
In the
They
middle
don't need
of
to close is the point.
Martha.
That when you hit that,
No,
it says a
the
measurement
mayor
established
said-
by the teachers
the
union
mayor-
over the summer in order to reach an agreement to reopen in the
No.
first place was a 3% threshold.
The mayor set the 3% threshold. What the teachers union did in New York City afterwards was to say, these are the safeguards that we need, and this is the testing we need.
Given that, all of these experts and scientists say that children are safer in school. It's worked across Europe. It's worked across the UK. They never closed their schools during their second spike, and now they're in recovery. They're down 10%, and the kids are not missing out on their education.
And what they did in Europe and what they did in New Zealand is that they had national leadership that closed, that did masks, that actually closed the bars, that did some of those things,
totally
including the stimulus.
Yeah,
That's
given
what
all
we
that,
need
they
to
still
do.
say the kids are safer in school.
They're connected, Martha.
The numbers rising,
They're
but the kids are
connected.
safer in school.
And so after hospitals, I think we have
Opening mean. If you do 6 feet of physical distancing, you're essentially saying in a school, you're going to have about 50% or 60% of people in there at any one time, not 100%.
Yeah, there you have it. So there's the union head showing incredible, staggering hypocrisy. You saw the Fox News, Martha McCallum calling her out on it. It is unbelievable that how much hypocrisy they are willing to go through. Page 449 of this document. On December 8th, 2020, in response to Biden's promise to reopen a majority of schools within the first 100 days, Randy Weingarten wrote, "Hallelujah. Biden understands if we secure the resources and put the public health safeguards in place, we can open schools safely in the second semester and his first 100 days. Blah, blah, blah." Unfortunately, the report says, many schools across the country were not reopened within 100 days. In fact, only 54% of schools K through 12 were fully open. This was despite a desperate attempt by the Biden-Harris administration to redefine school reopening to include schools that were only open 1 day per week. So, if you remember this, the schools in rural areas, small cities, small towns were almost completely open. Red states were open. Chicago their teachers union fought to the bitter end to try to stay remote. The teachers unions obviously did not give a care in the world about the kids. Despite what they say now, it's, we have to, fix the problems that we caused and whatnot. In Ohio, the city of Columbus was closed. Cleveland schools were closed. It was a crap show. Many schools, the report goes on, many schools remained closed because of the American Federation of Teachers and Mrs. Weingarten's political interference into the CDC issuance of the Biden administration's first school reopening guidance entitled Operational Strategy for K-12 Schools Through Phase Prevention. So, as you probably remember, American Federation of Teachers wrote the Biden's response to school closures, wrote their directive. And people ask, is AFT a scientific organization? And the response is, of course, no, it's a trade union. But we were told to trust the science, but a teachers union was telling the administration to go all science on school closures. And this is just political hypocrisy at its worst. And again, we're not going to forget this stuff. And the one hiccup I have with this report is that it says that Operation Warp Speed was a huge success and vaccines saved millions of lives. I don't think that's true. If you read Alex Berenson's analysis on it and some others, the COVID vaccines caused a lot of harm that have not been addressed. They've caused a lot of side effects, and people in my small circle have understood. They were pushed on teenage boys who developed paralysis and heart problems. I'm not going to get into all the vaccine stuff here, but I'm highly skeptical of the pharma industry after COVID. I was kind of optimistic for pharma before, even though they've done some bad things over the years. But now I don't trust any of them, and I definitely don't trust the COVID vaccine. And none of our family ever got it, and I recommended to others that they don't get it unless they're in some kind of really high risk group for COVID, morbidly obese and severely old or something. But there's no reason that a healthy young person should ever get the COVID vaccine. One other thing that came out of this report is that the trust between a patient and their doctor has been irreparably damaged. And that is definitely true. I've talked to many people who had a doctor that said, hey, you need to get the COVID vaccine. Why aren't you getting it? And they're like, I don't need it. I'm 40 years old and healthy, or whatever. My kids don't need it, and so on. And the doctors would be perplexed and skeptical and so on. It was clear that the doctors were just getting money for pushing the vaccine. Every time they shot somebody up, they'd get a check from pharma. And they didn't really care about the person's health or whether they need it. And this leads me to my very last point in this long COVID episode, is that I know people who maybe aren't considered that intelligent in a lot of areas. Maybe they didn't finish high school or whatever, and they got it. The COVID thing. They're like, what are you doing locking people down, putting a mask on me, and trying to stick a needle in my arm that's not tested? And I know a lot of people who everyone thinks they're really smart. PhDs, lawyers, doctors, really elite people, smarty pantses of the world. They run out and get a COVID vaccine. They say that masks, you got to put masks on kids to stop a virus. They weren't skeptical of the government at all. So I don't know what phenomena in people's mental health made them a COVID skeptic versus a COVID sheep. I'm still trying to figure that out. I know for me personally, I'm neither here nor there. When people were going into a panic about COVID in early March 2020, and there was a lot of deaths and things going on in Italy at the time. This was around March 9th. And I looked at the data for people who were dying over there or sick. And it was clearly a overwhelming majority of people who were dying from COVID were very, very old, had lots of comorbidities, were extremely unhealthy. And then the people who were 18 and got COVID, 20, 30 years old, they were fine. They were, had some minor symptoms or no symptoms at all. I'm thinking, man, this is, what's everybody panicking about? Like, we got to keep, the old and the sick away from this thing and figure out a solution for them. But before we know it, everybody in the United States is wearing masks. Everybody is in a panic, and we're all wanting to stay home. And you go to shake somebody's hand and they're like, scared of you, worried about this virus. Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. And the public health authorities and politicians made the COVID virus something the whole family can enjoy, something for the whole population. And it wasn't, ever. And if you showed the data on who was really at risk, you were vilified, censored, called a kook. And that's what Dr. Atlas and Bhattacharya and Alex Berenson and everybody, that's what they were trying to do, is show the data as to where the real risk lies and where the real attention, public health attention, should be directed. And they were called names and thrown off social media and everything else. So I got it early on, as early as anybody. I was a skeptic right away. And I had people calling me names. I've been unfriended. I've lost, plenty of friends who, fine. I don't really miss them at all. I was called names and so on for being skeptical. And I was completely right. And all the people who stood and speak and who became politically active and threw some idiots out of a school board who put masks on little kids, we were validated. in the end with COVID. And here's a it's either 520 or 557 pages, however you read this subcommittee report, with plenty of data behind it. So that's all for now. Maybe I'll do some more on COVID later on. I know a lot of people are tired of the conversation, but I don't want to forget about it. I don't want to forget about the totalitarian nature of the government response and how this was really a test for how much power can we exert over private citizens from the government. What can we make them do? And they pushed it all the way to the end and beyond. And if it wasn't for the U.S. Constitution, federalism, and some Republican governors and Republican legislators, we would all still be in lockdown. We'd all still be wearing masks, because there's people on the Democrat side and the media side who never gave it up. There's people who said that we should be masking kids forever, every day. There's actually people that said that. So that's all for now, and I hope you've enjoyed this. Find us on X @LadDilgard or on YouTube, Stand and Speak. And thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Would appreciate it also if you gave us a little thumbs up, subscribed, and shared it with a couple of people who are sober and reasonable and who might appreciate it. Thank you very much.